production of the South Carolina Educational Television Network.
The moment has arrived. Once a year, the two most important football teams in the world meet on the gridiron. This Saturday they do it again, and tonight on Carolina Journal we'll talk about the game, the Carolina-Clemson clash. Also tonight, three men who follow the teams to bring you the color, the excitement, and the behind-the-scenes stories. Two sports writers and a sportscaster join us for an in-depth discussion of what we can expect. The most important man on any team is the coach. We'll bring you both Danny Ford and Joe Morrison to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of their respective teams. Plus, former Gamecock and Tiger players conduct a pep rally for their old teams and another look at a high-tech fitness program. Good evening, I'm Mike Collins. There's Pitt and Penn State, there's Harvard and Yale, there's Georgia and Georgia Tech, there's Southern Cal and UCLA, but nowhere is the rivalry more intense or the fans more loyal than right here in South Carolina, when the University of South Carolina Gamecocks meet the Clemson University Tigers. Whether there are Tiger paws all the way from Clemson to Williams-Brice or chicken tracks from Columbia to Death Valley, this is the most talked about game of the year, every year, and this year's matchup is only 6 days away. Tonight, we're going to get you ready, and Pete Poore will start us off.
Thank you, Mike. You sports expert, you. This time of year, it's one of the hottest tickets in towns, and that's when you get one to see the Gamecocks and the Tigers line up for the single game that can make or break a football season. Every year, the interest is up more than ever as each fan hopes his or her side will have the bragging rights for the next year. Gamecock fans haven't been in that enviable position for a number of years now, but hopes are high for the Garnet and Black as Carolina will take a record-setting 9-1 mark into Clemson's Death Valley this Saturday. And in all probability, this last regular season game will not be the end of the 1984 season for Carolina. Sometime after 6 p.m. Saturday, USC Athletic Director Bob Markham will likely receive a phone call from a bowl committee somewhere in Florida, inviting the Gamecocks to be their guests in a postseason game. Meanwhile, the Tigers are putting it all on the line this week. The Tigers are in their final year under Atlantic Coast Conference sanctions. Saturday's clash is the bowl game for Danny Ford and his players. They'd like nothing better than to send South Carolina off to a bowl with a 9-2 record. Well, rest assured that if it weren't for the ACC probation, the Tigers with their current 7-3 record would also be making bowl plans after this weekend. Well, as Mike said, the Clemson-USC match is a rivalry among rivalries, and we talked with some players and a coach who have first-hand experience in playing the big game.
That is the war of the week. When you go down there, nothing goes on in small towns. Nobody worries about their car business, the gasoline, the service station, their tires. All they do is sit there and feud with one another about whether South Carolina's going to win or Clemson's going to win.
Well, it's the game. You know, it's the whole thing. It's a season. It's the winter, the spring, the summer. It just makes life easier if you live in the state and you win. And fortunately, I never lost to them, which helped a lot. But that's particularly important now when I look back on my career, still living in the state, to say you never lost to Clemson.
Well, during the 4 years that I was at Clemson, we won 2 games and we lost 2. And unfortunately, the last one that we lost was my senior year, so you know, I didn't go out as good as I wanted to then. But that game against Clemson in South Carolina, it's I would say the closest thing to it is like the Pitt-Penn State game up here. It's a big rivalry, and everybody's looking to win that game. As far as records are concerned, records don't mean anything when you play this game because it's the biggest game of the year and it's going to be a dogfight. I love it. I love that game.
It was the ultimate in college football. Like I say, a rivalry as tough as Carolina and Clemson was just a total picture in college football.
What's the difference now that you're not playing? You've been out of it for some time, but you're still a local alumni, so to speak, and you're still involved in the Carolina-Clemson rivalry, at least as a fan.
I get very wound up, and it's almost worse being a fan. When you're a player, you know that you've got to put it out of your mind a little bit, but as a fan, it's especially having played, you're always talking to people, and it's always on your mind, and that's the topic of conversation the whole week.
Well, I expect the main thing is that the state of South Carolina, about half of them are Clemson fans and about half of them are Gamecock fans. And it's not just the day of the game, it goes on the year round, and it goes year after year, the same thing. the winner is short. But that loser, he has a tough time for about 12 months.
Is the game any different to you now that you're not coaching?
Well, one thing about it, I don't have to worry about it anymore. It used to be kind of life and death, but now it's just a game to me. One team gonna win, one gonna lose. The weather the next day is gonna be just the same no matter which one of them wins.
All right, George, this South Carolina-Clemson situation now. When you were there, what did that mean to you?
A lot of hitting, mostly coming from them. Now it's a very exciting game to play in, and if you ever want to get up for a game, I think if you're at Carolina-Clemson is probably the best game you can go to. A lot of excitement, a lot of hard hitting, a lot of cheating. No, but that was a great experience for me, especially when I went there, because it always built up the emotion, the adrenaline get going, and it's always exciting to play in.
During your 3-4 years, whatever that, was there any particular thing or game that you remember in that rivalry, any particular play, anything that stands out?
Yeah, I got my shoulder dislocated playing against Clemson my sophomore year, and I had to get operated on. But mostly, I guess the important thing I remember is the one time that we beat them when I was there. We beat them 13-6, and probably the most exciting thing I ever went through at South Carolina was beating them.
So who's going to win this year?
South Carolina. You kidding me?
Well, no, we're not running a trivia quiz. That first player you saw was Jeff Bostic, a former Clemson Tiger, a former center, and he now plays for the Washington Redskins. Second player, of course, was Tommy Suggs, who quarterbacked the Gamecocks from 1967 to 1969. And the third player you saw was Benny Cunningham, a tight end from the Clemson area, who now plies his trade with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I knew all that.
I knew you did. You were whispering it in my ear. Well, tonight on Carolina Journal, we are talking about Saturday's Clemson-Carolina game, and that topic needs no further introduction. So we'll introduce our guests, and these are all gentlemen who follow the programs very closely. With us is Bob Gillespie, who is a sports writer with the Columbia Record, and his regular beat is the USC Athletic Department. And also in our Columbia studio is Jim Forrest. Jim is the executive producer, the host, the travel agent, and 6 other things for the Joe Morrison Show. And also in a studio in Spartanburg at Spartanburg General Hospital, we have Chris Smith. Chris is with the Greenville News, and his regular beat is following the Tigers. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome all of you to the program, and you, Chris. No question. What do you think, guys? What about this show coming up here Saturday, this Clemson-Carolina clash? Any thoughts? What are your thoughts?
Why is everybody looking at me?
Because you're first.
Well, I know that just about everybody you talk to is probably as excited about this game as they've ever been. I think originally I thought that the losses the two teams had this past weekend coming in might take a little of the glimmer off the game. It doesn't seem to have done that at all. Most of the people who regularly enjoy this game as much as they do are just about as fired up for it now as they ever are.
Oh, I think there's more at stake this year from the fact that both teams are good football teams. You know, obviously Clemson at the beginning of the year was picked as one of the premier teams in the country. Things haven't exactly worked out that way for them. I don't think that makes them any less of a football team. I think there's some other little things that crept in there and probably hurt them on their way to 7-3. Carolina, obviously a big surprise to be 9-1. But when you have two teams like this with very fine records, both ranked among the best in the country, boy, that's what you look for in a rivalry game like this every year. I think it's great.
Chris, you were, I'm sure, privy to all the information that's been coming out of Columbia about Carolina this year, and we've been hearing down here that Clemson was hoping Carolina would come into the game 10-0. It's not going to be that way. Is that taking the edge off up there?
I don't think so. It's the same game year after year. It would have been nice, I think, for the Clemson players because obviously they have no place to go after the season's over with if they could have upset the #1 team because everything was indicating last weekend South Carolina, if they had won, would have been #1. But no, I don't think it takes anything off of them. I wish we'd be able to find out for sure, but Danny Ford has put the lid on talking to the players this week, so we won't know.
Jim, why has South Carolina's 2-quarterback system worked here when other schools it seems to not work so well?
I wish I really had an answer to that. I think that the fact that everything started happening for the Gamecocks on a positive note. Mike Holt came in early in the year and he made things happen and made a couple big plays happen. And then I think it was just a snowball effect. It really took off. He played very, very well. I think the chemistry as the team that Joe Morrison talks about obviously was a key to that whole thing. I think the two quarterback systems has worked in the past for other people, but it is working here this year. I think for the most part, it probably wasn't as effective at the Navy game as it has been in some of the others. But that's going to happen. And I think that the fact that the two quarterbacks, Mitchell and Holt, kept it in perspective pretty well all year long helped it to work. And they were just good things were happening.
You know, Bob, that was the one question that wasn't asked this morning at Coach Morrison's weekly press conference, and that is, will you start Mike Holt now that this inanimate object that allegedly is broke, has not been broken, is broken?
I would have a hard time believing that he would change that. It's worked well all year, and one aberration like the Navy game I don't think is going to change that. Every game that they've tried, except for Navy, they've always pushed the right buttons, and for whatever reason it didn't work this week. I think if it's going to work at all again, it will work the way it's worked before.
I think maybe we saw the first breakdown in that quarterback system this past week at Navy, and the fact that the Gamecocks had completed a successful drive for a touchdown. It took like 6 minutes of a drive. They come in with Mike Holt, and it looked like they were trying to force something big to happen. And when you try to do that, oftentimes that backfires. And that particular time, I think the result was like 3 successive sacks. And I think that maybe they got out of there. That was the first indication they were getting a little bit out of sync in their offensive pattern.
Chris, Maryland ran all over Clemson last Saturday. Do you think that Clemson's defense can stop USC's running game?
It depends on what they run at them. They've, throughout the season, Georgia Tech and then NC State had tremendous success running misdirections and counter plays, and that's what Maryland did on Saturday. But Maryland also did something that I really hadn't seen this year, and after a while they were just flat out blocking them back and opening up huge holes. They are susceptible in various areas, but mainly the misdirection and counters.
This year, South Carolina, according to Joe Morrison, has faced teams that are big, maybe not as fast as South Carolina, in the likes of Georgia and Pittsburgh, and obviously teams that did have speed in the skill positions but didn't have the size in teams like East Carolina. Where would you fit Clemson into that kind of categorization?
Clemson has tremendous talent, but I think the polls in the beginning of the season, we saw that obviously a lot of people thought they had the size players, the talent players. They put them up ranking where Pittsburgh was, where everyone else was. But I think Clemson is facing a different type of situation this year with the, I think motivation has as much to do with talent as anything else.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, they've just had some problems after the Georgia game. They were totally flat, and no matter how much talent they might have had, they had all sorts of problems against Tech.
All righty. It's Chris Smith. Coming up on Carolina Journal, we will continue our discussion with Chris, Bob Gillespie, and Jim Forrest. We will also give you another look at another phase of a high-tech fitness program that they've been putting me through here. First, a visit with the two men who have been guiding Clemson and Carolina to winning seasons this year, Danny Ford and Joe Morrison. We asked Coach Ford what he would do if he was coaching the opposing team this Saturday.
The next thing I'd look and see the weaknesses of graduation losses, and they have several. There's strong safeties that never played and young, and we had 2 3-year starters at that position, and Childers and Suttle, who played very well for us. I'd find a way to attack that until those youngsters proved they could play, and then I'd worry about the inexperience of the defensive line. They got one starter back in Perry, and everybody else is new. The other starter would be Mack, who is from Winsboro, South Carolina, who played as a freshman, and we're very lucky that he turned out to be the kind of football player he did as a freshman. but he's still a little bit inexperienced. So I would go that way defensively, and then offensively, figuring a way to, I think you'd have to start with Epley. The youngster can do a lot of things. He can throw, and he can run the option, and he can handle a football team, and he's a very mature leader, very gifted athlete, very hard worker, and he can step in the huddle and control the situation, and he doesn't get rattled. So I would find a way to get his attention if I could. And then you just have to go and decide whether you're going to try to match up strength for strength or go weakness against strength.
Well, they're a fine football team, and they have over the years. They got a great tradition going up there. Offensively, I think everything centers around Epley. He makes everything happen for them. They got a fine group of running backs. Their offensive line consists of upperclassmen, and they play very, very well. They play very hard. Defensively, you know, Perry is kind of their main gun over there on defense, and they got a lot of other fine football players over there also. So they're a very solid defensive football team. Kicking game, probably one of the best in the country, if not the best.
Danny Ford has said that Mike Epley is like a coach on the field for Clemson. What are your feelings about that? Do you detect any of that from the film you've seen?
Oh, I think so. You know, when you have someone out there that's played the number of times that he's played and the number of games that he's played, the pressure situations that he's played in, and he understands their offense very well. He has the ability to automatic very well, so I would go along with that.
Any concern in your mind about this week that your team, your players may peak too soon, may get too emotional before Saturday gets here?
Well, no, I don't think so. You know, it's going to take them a day or two to get over last week, and then we're going to start building towards Saturday. So I think emotionally we'll be ready to play come Saturday.
We're sitting here talking tonight with Chris Smith of the Greenville News, Bob Gillespie of the Columbia Record, and also good old Jim Forrest. Works so many places, Jim, I can't keep track of it. Jim Forrest of the Coach Joe Morrison Show. And I'm going to drop back now and pass the ball to you, Jim. Go ahead.
Okay, Mike, thank you. Chris, a question for you. I heard an assistant coach at the University of Maryland on the post-game show up in Maryland this past weekend, since we were both only about 40 miles apart, talk about running the football against the Clemson Tigers. And he said they felt confident that they could run the football against the Tigers Saturday, figuring their defensive line wasn't anywhere near as good as it was a year ago. How do you feel?
Well, I think that's true. First of all, you do have William in the middle, but he's had to play the full game, and he says that he doesn't tire that much, but you have to consider that without really any real backup help, he's going to wear down. He's still had some outstanding fourth quarters. He'll make the big plays in the fourth quarters. But the other thing is, and I think this is where they've really been hurting, is they have two very talented freshmen, and Michael Perry and Dwayne Meadows at one tackle, but they're also very inexperienced. They've been gaining a lot of experience. Michael has really come on, but they have been susceptible to various plays, especially, like I said, the misdirections. I think the coaches say that they're caught out of position at times, and they're still learning the system. They're doing very well, but when you don't have the Robinsons and everyone else, it hurts.
Bob, what do you think that USC's weakness is on defense?
On defense, well, the biggest thing probably would be the defensive line, and that is almost an identical situation at Clemson, I guess, not in size, because South Carolina's a very small defensive line, and they rely on quickness, but they have very little depth in that. Several of those players have been playing banged up all season long, and you know, after 10 games, it starts to wear you down. You saw a little bit of that, I believe, in the Navy game, where Navy was able to run a lot of counters and inside things and sort of move them around a little bit and open up some holes.
This weekend, Joe Morrison said nothing had changed pretty much except for the execution. The execution of what had worked before was not there. What were your observations? You both were there.
I think that that's very true. It just seemed like they were out of sync a little bit. And you got that feeling a little bit earlier in a couple of other games. It started, however, to come together in those games. This one, it never really got together. It was like maybe 8 guys were doing fine. Maybe there was a breakdown 3 places. Maybe sometime it only takes a breakdown in 1 place. But it just seemed out of sync. And as the game went along, it was almost like panic set in. And maybe there was a few people trying to make that big play, and they got caught out of position or something like that.
I don't think it was ever looking back, ever any one particular area either. Sometimes the line would break down and the quarterbacks would be rushed. Sometimes the quarterbacks would rush themselves. Sometimes the running backs didn't get a grip on the ball. Sometimes there were bad pitches. It was just a little bit of everything. It seemed like a group effort.
I think there was a lot of pressure put on the defense by the offense in this game. As I looked at it, it was more of a breakdown on the offensive side of the football, perhaps than the defense. When you consider the places that the defense had to defend, great field position for Navy on many of those turnovers. And I think that was a problem for the defense. I think they felt committed then that they had to come and make the big defensive play to get the ball back.
Chris, you've already talked a little bit about how Clemson's defensive line got knocked backwards, which is something rarely seen from Clemson football last Saturday. At the beginning of the season, Danny Ford said that really only William Perry had the experience up there on the front line. How has the rest of that defensive line developed during this season?
Yeah, it's developed very well. Steve Berlin's a solid tackle, and Michael Dean is, and Dwayne is, and they still have a lot of youth, and that has hurt. They've come a long way, but again, there have been the problems of thinking that they've corrected the problems against the misdirections, and suddenly we see that I guess they haven't, because Maryland was very effective with them.
Chris, I think that the one thing we've talked about here is the defense, or the problems perhaps that Clemson has had some with their defense, but that offensive football team is still a good one, and probably can cause a lot of people a lot of problems, aren't they?
It's an outstanding offense. Their problems early in the season, Al Groh of Wake Forest pointed out when you asked him what the problem with Clemson was when they were struggling, and he said, a team that turns the ball over 12 times in 2 games and still loses those 2 games to Georgia and Georgia Tech in the final minute, that shows that it's a pretty darn good team.
Chris, I'm sorry we're out of time, and I have to thank all of you and let you all get away without making a prediction on the scoreboard for next week's game. In the never-ending battle to get Mike Collins in some form of physical condition, we're trying to, we bring to you tonight the latest installment in that never-ending drama called Mike and High-Tech Fitness.
If you recall, in last week's episode of Getting Mike Fit, we began Steve Zigman's biofitness system by having a health check to see just exactly where I was in the scheme of things. Part of that check was to see how much I weighed. We would check that again this week before we start. Last week we checked in at 142, and this week we're at 142 again. Now, I don't know whether that's where I should be or not, but we're going to find out. You can go to a spa or a gym and put yourself on the perfect exercise program to get you fit. But at Steve Zigman's, it's sort of a comprehensive program, because his program includes nutrition. And he has a high-tech way of finding out what it is you should be eating. Steve Zigman uses a computer to set up a nutritionally balanced diet designed to coordinate with your own personal weight goals. First, the computer is given some vital statistics, such as age, height, and weight.
And we know your body weight is 142 because you just scaled yourself.
And the computer program goes on to ask some safety questions.
If you're under medical treatment,
no,
the program would not be adequate for you. This is just safety factors that are built into the software to keep the biofitness system and Steve Zigman from doing anything that may be harmful for you.
Okay.
You're not on a special diet.
Nope.
You're not an athlete at this time, even though you're on a fitness program. There's a difference between being fit and being an athlete.
You don't have to be insulting, Steve.
And I'm trying not to be.
The computer also takes into account the kind of life you lead, and then determines your ideal weight given your height. Despite that little roll around my midsection, I'm slim, and we decided that I should gain some weight. About 6 pounds, from 142 to 148 in a specified amount of time.
Let's try for November 30th, a month from now.
And the good news is,
there you go. For you to reach your target, exactly, of 148 pounds, on a date specific, 11/30/84, you should consume about 2,932 calories each day.
to get you to your goal, the computer allows you to choose from 197 different foods from 6 different groups, including dessert.
Ginger crinkles.
Sure.
Yogurt
Sure.
peach.
Why not?
Stirred custard.
Mm-hmm. Chocolate Bavarian.
They're tasty.
Sounds
They're
good.
tasty,
Okay, fine.
man.
No problem.
You should do that.
No problem.
Vanilla wafers.
I like you. Yeah, sure.
There are some less exciting choices to make, too.
Do you like skim milk at all? No. Let's put a no in there. Do you like low-fat milk, or can you accept it?
I guess I could do it in a pinch.
All right, let's put yes. And you like whole milk,
Sure.
so we're going to say yes to that. Cooked grits.
In the South, can I say no? Yeah, I guess I can.
You can say no to anything you want. This is your show.
I'm glad you pointed that out. Cooked oatmeal, no. We'll play it fair here.
But once the computer knows what you like, it makes the final decision, balances your meals for calorie and nutrient intake, and then gives you a printout.
Okay, Mike. Here is your hard copy of your weekly menus with a record of your goals and objectives in terms of your weight gain and the time in which it's going to be accomplished.
Okay. But that's not all. The biofitness program includes some precautions for those of us who can't always follow this high-tech diet.
Because truthfully, the vitamin and mineral supplements are going to have a lot to do with the energy levels that you're going to have and the amount of protein, carbohydrates, and fats that you're going to assimilate from your foods.
So what if I miss one of the meals on the printout?
That's the purpose for the liquid meal substitute Diet Plus. If you were on a weight loss diet, the Diet Plus would substitute in a low-calorie form for the meal that you would not be able to prepare according to the menus because it was inconvenient in your day. Since you're on a weight-gaining diet, truthfully, anytime you cannot prepare a meal according to those portions, there's nothing wrong with you going into a restaurant and eating those large, voluminous portions that the restaurants normally serve. You'll use the Diet Plus either as a substitute because you don't have a chance to eat at all, or as an addition, so that you gain additional nutrients to help you build and help you grow.
Food and nutrition. That's the easy part of the biofitness system. There is, however, some work involved, and we'll show you that next week.
You know, Mike, Joe Morrison's been watching this series, and he wants you to suit up Saturday in a
no
Clemson
problem.
uniform.
I'll be in my three-piece tux. Coming up tomorrow on Carolina Journal, we'll probe MTV, music television, to find out what kind of impact it's having on television, on radio, and on its primary viewers, the kiddos.
Contributing editor Rick Seaback will comment on the video scene, and Rick Wrigley will look at another area of consumer electronics.
You can't read that far away, can you?
No, I need
Plus
glasses.
a preview of Farm City Week, all tomorrow night right here on Carolina Journal. Thank you for watching tonight, and good night.
Good night.